welcome to the 29th edition of the eDuck podcast. I am Robby Boydston alongside my co-host, who is in Eugene, Erik Scopel. How you doing, Erik?
Pretty good, Robby. Just getting ready for this big game on Saturday. Game day coming to town. Does that get you pretty excited?
Oh, it always does. I mean, that's a big reason why people get pumped up for these marquee matchups. And seeing as of right now, this is the biggest game coming to Autzen so far this season. There's a reason to be excited, especially given the fact that most of the games haven't been super entertaining for more than maybe a half, and there's hope that maybe this one might turn out that way. But then again, if the UCLA team that showed up at Stanford last week shows up, this one could get ugly, I think, pretty quick.
Yeah, and I think that's you look at UCLA and what they did to start the season, the first four games there. And then they've kind of been hit with the injury bug the last little bit, and you go ahead and look at their team, and they're going to be starting about 5 freshmen on offense, 3 of which are on the offensive line, so that's a place to potentially Oregon could exploit and get after Hundley. I was looking through their rushing and sack numbers since a couple of those injuries have happened, and their running game is literally down by about a quarter of what it was to start the season, and they've given up more sacks in the last 2 games than they almost gave up for the first 4. So you kind of wonder what UCLA team we're going to see here. The team we saw against Nebraska in the second half there, where they came back and won by 3 scores, or the team last week that really just genuinely didn't look like they could move the ball against what is a very good Stanford defense, but a Stanford defense that had just given up 4 touchdowns the week before to Utah.
Yeah, and that really is the key. I think you hit right on the head. And not only that, I think, for UCLA's offense to get going, it does revolve around Hundley and what he's able to do. And last week, Stanford did a good job of not only getting back to the run game, but also just limiting what Hundley could do with that pass rush. Really set him, I guess the best way is a little bit off in terms of their execution offensively, and it lasted the entire game pretty much and made that win a little bit easier for Stanford. But again, this isn't a team that, this is a pretty tough team with a pretty tough coach. You look at their offense, putting up almost 40 points a game still. Total defense-wise, they're actually ranked above Oregon in terms of what they can do, sitting 3rd in the conference. Giving up only 357 yards a game. You got to imagine that's not going to happen on Saturday against Oregon, given what they can do, sitting 1st in the conference, 643 yards per game thus far, averaging over 8 yards a play. But again, Oregon has let some teams hang around there, especially early. You saw against Colorado, if not for a couple of mistakes there by Colorado on interceptions, that turns into a pretty entertaining first half last week against a Washington State team that they did end up eventually blowing out of the water. But again, going into halftime, it was only 10 points. UCLA is a much tougher team, and I don't think what you saw last week is exactly what you're going to see heading into this week. I think there will be moments where Hundley will be able to take advantage of some of those short passes over the middle that seem to continue to be a bugaboo for Oregon in terms of stopping them and those turning into big plays and then setting up some red zone opportunities. And that's something the Oregon defense is going to have to limit, is try and replicate what Stanford did with that pass rush, put some pressure on Hundley, take the run away from them, and force Hundley to beat you with his arm. And if they can do that, I think they feel pretty comfortable with the secondary they've got back there, especially the way that a few of those guys, in particular Terrence Mitchell, has been playing the last couple of weeks.
Well, one of the things for me, having watched that Stanford game, is if you get Hundley out of the pocket, which was something that Stanford did a very good job of, he really struggled to throw the ball on the run, and they got him out there, kind of made him roll out to his right or his left, and he was pretty inconsistent throwing the football. And another thing that you have to bring up here is their junior running back, Jordan James, missed the last 2 games. James, of course, ran for over 155 yards in 2 of their first 3 games, but he didn't play against Cal or Stanford. And like I said, they only managed to run for about 75 yards per game there. I think that's might be a big part here on Saturday is, first off, you stop that run game if James isn't healthy or if James doesn't play, and then you force Hundley out of the pocket there. Some guys really excel on the run, throwing the ball. Marcus Mariota is one of those guys. Johnny Manziel is one of those guys. I don't think from what I saw from Hundley, and maybe that'll prove different maybe that'll prove different on Saturday, but at least the way Stanford approached him, it looked like they got him rolling one way, and he had a really hard time finding his receivers on the run.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought he struggled I got to watch the first half there, and while neither team was very impressive in the first half, it was pretty noticeable that the Brett Hundley I thought was going to show up last week didn't show up. The one that had that a good second half against Nebraska and has led them to some pretty good wins. Again, if you put that pressure on Hundley, this has the possibility of opening up to be an ugly game. Because right now you've got, and really something that is fun to think about is the fact that the spotlight for college football in terms of the Pac-12 is going to be on the state of Oregon this week. When you look at UCLA coming up to face Oregon, and then later that night Stanford coming up to play Oregon State, you got the four best teams in the Pac-12 playing each other. And they're not easy road tests for either of those California teams. And I think for UCLA more so for obvious reasons, just given the fact of what Oregon's been able to do this season. But I do think UCLA will get an opportunity against that Oregon defense to at least get a little bit of a head start. Whether or not they'll be able to maintain it throughout the game is a completely different story.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously that UCLA defense is going to be challenged here with all of the different position players that Oregon will throw at you. And another weapon appears to be coming back in DeAnthony Thomas, who missed the last 4 games with an ankle injury. Of course, hasn't taken a snap from scrimmage since that Tennessee game at Autzen, I believe on the 16th of September. I believe that's right. And one of the things that has really been hyped up about this UCLA defense is that front seven, and this is going to probably prove to be maybe a test here, and maybe an opportunity for Marcus to really break out again, because there's a chance that this UCLA front seven could be pretty suffocating and really stop the run game, and it might have to come down to Marcus throwing the ball through the air to those receivers and trying to get everything involved that way or with his own legs, kind of off. Kind of like we talked about earlier, running the ball or running on the throw. So I'm curious to see how they respond. A lot has been made out of UCLA's defense, front seven. Obviously, Anthony Barr is the star player there. He's an outside linebacker that's kind of a terror for quarterbacks. He's got 11 tackles for loss this year, 4 of them sacks. Really one of the premier players in the conference in terms of NFL draft prospectus. So, that's a name to watch there. But really, having spoken with a couple of the Oregon guys, it's all the way across the board. This UCLA front seven is pretty dang good, they think, and obviously going to be, I think, part of the game that at least offensively for Oregon is going to be trying to establish that run game against what might be the best front seven they've faced this year, and arguably one of the top 2 or 3 along with Stanford and Oregon in this conference.
And one of the things that they will be able to utilize, though, and building off of that DeAnthony Thomas return point, is the fact that even last week Scott Frost mentioned in his post-game comments that with the development of Byron Marshall becoming more and more consistent in his sophomore season and really surpassing what he did last year, and the fact that Thomas Tyner seems to be getting a little bit more and more comfortable back there in that second spot, you open up the possibility of DeAnthony Thomas becoming a force in that slot position as a wide receiver and really opening up some things and throwing some dynamic plays that maybe we as writers and even the fans haven't seen this season, stuff that Oregon can really go back and open up the playbook because you're bringing back such a unique talent. And on top of that, you flip that around, and something you wrote about today, Eric, the fact that UCLA is going to be starting 3 freshmen there on that or possibly 3 freshmen there on that offensive line. For Oregon, their defensive line, they were able to get a little bit of pressure last week, but again, Tony Washington even said that it wasn't what they wanted. You look at that defensive line and some of those linebackers and trying to force the pressure on a young offensive line like that. That's going to add more problems for Hundley in trying to make plays and cause him to force some throws that could end up in some turnovers in Oregon's favor.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And, of course, the turnover battle is something you always focus in on. And this game might be, a great instance of that because Oregon now showing a little bit of the turnover bug. We'll see how they respond from last week. And, it's funny that probably there were some fans screaming at their TVs or screaming at Autzen Stadium while Marcus turned it over on back-to-back possessions, kind of going, wondering what's going wrong here. And that, I think the fact that so much was made out of Marcus turning it over twice in one football game, it just says how far Oregon has come. I mean, he still hasn't thrown an interception, and yet the guy is the subject of, I don't want to say a lot of criticism, but of some people being a little bit concerned that the guy maybe he's got some issues with the turnover bug, even though he's turned it over twice all season in what is probably amounts to about 500 snaps. So, but it'll be interesting to see how he responds. Does he do a better job of securing the football? Does the offensive line do a better job of protecting him, which actually the last 2 weeks they haven't done as good as they had done the rest of the season? Part of that, I'm sure, has to do with just the quality of competition being a step up, and from Washington and Washington State being probably the two best teams they played in the conference. I don't think Colorado or Cal lost to Washington State, and Colorado wouldn't hold a candle against those teams either. So it'll be interesting to see now how Marcus responds to that. He gets so much credit for kind of his approach and how he kind of puts things behind him. So this is going to be another test here, and let's see if he can continue to extend that Pac-12 conference record of pass attempts without an interception, which he still hasn't thrown this season.
Yeah, and that's the important statistic, is when he's throwing the ball through the air, he's been crisp, and he's remained that way. And you can attribute some of that to that system, but again, you look at the development of the wide receivers, and that's where you see a guy like Matt Lubick, who came in this year from Duke and has really kind of transformed that wide receiver core to becoming a big lethal threat in terms of not just the typical, Oregon fans have been used to seeing the bubble screen and seeing that utilized a lot for a lot of their gains, and to set up some of those deeper plays. This year, you're seeing the fact that they're not afraid to go deep early and take advantage of some mismatches, and they've got the size and speed to take advantage of that, and that's something that I expect to see against UCLA. There's probably going to be fewer moments of that. Again, UCLA's defense is something different. They've got some talented guys, even some talented younger guys back there. A guy like Miles Jack, freshman, comes to mind with the plays he's made this season. But it should be interesting to see what Oregon's going to be able to do with that playbook. And again, trying to put that pressure up on the defensive side. I think you're in for a treat either way, and especially with the game being as early as it is, it looks like everybody's going to get a chance to watch that with a 4:00 start. So, should we get into predictions, or do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, let's do predictions, and then maybe we can take a quick minute to talk about the BCS and Nick Aliotti and his BSing from the past weekend, and then jump into the conference predictions. Does that seem fair, Robbie? I know you got a bit of a stuffed up nose and a sore throat, so let's try to limit the damage. But let's jump into predictions. I'll go ahead and start it out. I'm a little bit concerned about that UCLA front offensively. It's just so difficult to try to put out guys who've been with the program, in some cases less than 6 months, and expect them to really succeed and be effective. And Oregon has done, I think, this year a pretty good job of getting after the quarterback when they've wanted to. Aliotti obviously picks and chooses his spots pretty well. We'll see how aggressive they are. And it doesn't help that two of those true freshmen are on the right side of the line there. I mean, that leads me to believe you're just going to run a lot of guys off that edge possibly, and we'll see how UCLA does in terms of playing against that. But I think Oregon just proves to be too good offensively, and I don't think UCLA is going to have the fighting power with what appears to be kind of a diminished running game with James out, and a diminished passing game now with the inability for that offensive line to really protect Hundley very effectively. So I'm going to go ahead and take Oregon. I don't think they're going to get to 50 this week, which will be the second time this season, so it's a rarity. I'm going to go ahead and pick 42 to, I'll say 24, and I don't think it probably is as close as that, but UCLA gets a couple touchdowns in the second half that make Aliotti want to drop more language.
Well, I think Oregon will get over that 40 mark. I think this is a game that's just set up for them to do that, especially given the fact that they can take advantage of the run and the pass so efficiently now with what they've been able to develop over the past 7 weeks. I think you're looking at a 45-20 game. Again, if they, depending on UCLA's health at the run game, if they don't really have anything going there, it's going to be tough for them to score on Saturday night. Now, let's get into that BCS real quick.
Yeah.
So last week, and again, we talked about it on Saturday, so those of you that listened already kind of had a little bit of a heads up, but, Florida State goes into Clemson, stomps them unmercifully. I mean, that was just an ugly game, especially there in the second half. Yeah. And they get the benefit of it by jumping ahead of Oregon in the BCS standings, the initial release, by .003 points, which, again, has some people a little upset. But then if you listen to, Brad Edwards, even on the BCS show, said it's a complete aberration. If Oregon wins out, they're easily going to jump Florida State. And I've even seen some people say if they win this weekend, they jump into that number 2 spot. Whether or not that happens, I don't think Oregon should be concerned because, obviously that's a long-term goal. You want to be at 2 at the end of the season. It doesn't matter where you're at now. But what are your thoughts on it, Eric? And I mean, do fans have a reason to be upset at the fact that even though Oregon's played exceptional ball, there's another team that's ahead of them right now?
I think they have the right to maybe have a gripe this week. I don't think they're going to have anything to have a gripe for going forward because, like you've said and like Brad Edwards said, and like I've said in the past, this is a system that is to project who the best team is at the end of the season, not who's the best team come week 7 or 8. And I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that Oregon would pass Florida State in the BCS with a quality win over UCLA, who figures to be probably around 17 or so. If they were to lose to Oregon, that's a quality win. And really, Oregon controls its destiny. I don't care how you look at it. Obviously, the BCS right now has Oregon second. I think what's frustrating for some Oregon fans is now that the national media is starting to talk about Florida State and Alabama as a matchup that they'd like to see, and maybe that they'd like to see even more than Oregon versus Alabama. And they may be concerned that, heck, if all 3 teams win out, maybe some of the pollsters are going to start leaning towards Florida State. And I think that's really the only chance Oregon has to be held out of it if all 3 teams win out, would be if the pollsters all of a sudden start to lean towards Florida State and they start picking up maybe some first-place votes, they start picking up some second-place votes that Oregon doesn't receive. That would be the only way I could foreseeably see Oregon not ending up in the BCS championship game. That is, if they all win out. And that's a tall order, of course. You can't take for lightly what Oregon has on the schedule. And I think because of that reason, Oregon will obviously have their chance to earn a spot in Pasadena for the national championship game.
I completely agree. And when you look at the schedule going down, going the rest of the season, you look at Florida State, while they do have a date with Miami, who's sitting number 7, and if they're still sitting there when they play them in 2 weeks, they've got an NC State team that I heard on the radio this week. I believe they've beat Florida State 3 out of 4 times over the last 4 meetings. So that, never know about that type of a matchup. But really the rest of the way after that, I think they close out with Syracuse and Idaho, which are just teams they should steamroll at this point. Not very impressive. They'll end up with a rematch against Miami or possibly Virginia Tech at the end of the season, depending on how things shake out. Maybe a win against Virginia Tech might stand out a little bit more, especially if they continue to win. But again, the Pac-12 right now is the strongest it's been in years, and Oregon's going to get a benefit from that, from the standpoint that their schedule is completely backloaded. So for the Duck fans that are freaking out, calm down, because come Sunday it could be completely different. And I think if Oregon does jump Florida State, there's not going to be a flip-flop after that going forward, especially given that Oregon's going to be playing their next 2 games against 2 top 12 BCS teams right now. And Nick Aliotti, we talked about it a little bit on Saturday. You did drop the quote live on the podcast there. And got a little talking to this week, got fined, and did issue an apology for his comments in which he said that Mike Leach throwing the ball as many times as he did at the end of the game using Connor Halliday to break the NCAA pass attempts record was, quote, bullshit.
Oh, Robbie, you're trying to earn that explicit rating on iTunes with that type of language, aren't you?
Well, we've already got the tag, and we dropped it once last week, and that is a quote. So I'll use it in quotes only. But again, should something be really made? I mean, is this really a big deal? Last week I said I thought it was silly. I still feel it's silly. I think, if Oregon wanted to, you brought up a good point, or if Oregon wanted to do anything, they should have stopped them, and those are the reps you want your scout team to face. Washington State was obviously playing for pride and for morale at that point. Oregon had blown the game wide open. Really, this should be a non-issue in my book, but why is it becoming such an issue, especially that it's lasted this long? We're 4 or 5 days now off of that game, and it's still making some news.
Well, I think first off, because the Pac-12 chose to act, and I think this is kind of one of the first punitive measures they've ever taken against a coach. And it's interesting that they took measures like that when the insult was not directed at the officials or at the Pac-12 itself, but instead at another coach in the conference. And of course, you want to keep, you don't like to hear that from your coaches. That doesn't represent the conference well when you've got one coach calling another coach low class and saying what he did was bull spit. Yeah, I think that's probably that plays into it. Is just that the Pac-12 responded. I mean, if they hadn't done anything, this probably is kind of old news. And I think Aliotti, from the people I've talked to, not in the media, but just friends of mine who are Oregon fans or people I know who are Oregon fans, they kind of liked hearing Aliotti get fired up a little bit, and maybe kind of a divergence from what has been for the last 4 or 5 years a coaching staff that really tries to avoid making the spotlight or avoid even really talking about things outside of their control. So I think that has to do with it a little bit. First off, because the Pac-12 responded, and secondly, because it's kind of so far out of character for what, Aliotti maybe not entirely out of character just because he's kind of
he's a fiery guy.
He's a fiery guy, a little bit of a loose cannon. But for the coaching staff, this is a coaching staff that we've become so, I guess, used to, kind of saying all the right things. We're not going to talk about the distractions, but now we've got one of the coaches calling out another coach in the conference. I just think it's a combination of those things, and obviously they've moved past it. Aliotti came out yesterday being Tuesday. First question was regarding it. He said, "Hey, I'm here to talk about UCLA, not about things that were said over the weekend." So they've obviously moved past it, and they obviously did a good job of kind of deflecting that and kind of moving forward. But you hate to have anything like that carry over this far into the week.
Should we move on to predictions?
Do it.
Let's do predictions. All right. So last week we had, if you've seen the record, we did post the record on the last show.
Why don't you go ahead and read it and let them know how much I'm winning by?
After a 4-3 week for the both of us, Eric is sitting at 22-11 for his season picks. I am sitting at 23-10. So I've got a slight. So Eric's been talking a lot. Now he needs to back it up here. But again, it's a new week, so he very well might. Last week we had.
Can I say something, Robbie?
Sure.
Part of it, I feel like I pick first every time, so I'm going to go ahead and let you pick first tonight.
That's fine. No, we'll let's do that. Now let's recap real quick. Last week, both of us had Colorado crushing Charleston Southern. I would like to point out real quick, just because I find it a little comical, one of the caveats I had to Colorado winning was that they were going to get their second rushing touchdown of the year. They ended up scoring 5 in the game alone. So, again, taking advantage of a lower team, but at the same time, Colorado finally finding the end zone on the ground with 5 rushing touchdowns last week, which just made me laugh. UCLA Stanford, we split the difference. I had Stanford, you had UCLA. In the other game that split the difference, I had Washington, and boy, am I getting off that bandwagon. And you had Arizona State, who clobbered them. And then we both had USC and their loss to Notre Dame, which, again, just it seems like you go to Notre Dame or you play Notre Dame and your offense falls into a black hole no matter who you are, even if you're USC and don't have a great offense going in there. Arizona State suffered the same fate a couple of weeks ago as well. This week, 5 Pac-12, going backwards a little bit there, to pick from this week. We covered Oregon, UCLA. Let's jump into that Washington-Cal game up there in Seattle. Washington, a 24.5-point favorite. I'm going to go with Washington on that one. I'll be jumping off the bandwagon going forward, I believe, in some of those other matchups. But, again, Washington should win this game, or, in my opinion, Steve Sarkisian is, he's going to be gone at the end of the season if they lose this game. This is a game they have to win after 3 demoralizing losses, and they should win it pretty handily. I'll take them putting up 45 points on Cal. I'll take it a 45-14 game up there in Seattle. But again, you look at Washington's schedule going forward, and it has 7-5 painted all over it. Eric, I'm interested in seeing what your thoughts are on a Washington team that had so much promise to begin the year and is really starting to stumble now.
I'm not really that surprised.
Okay.
Honestly, because this has kind of been what they've done the last 3 or 4 years. Is they start out and they jump up in the rankings, then maybe they pull an upset or two, and then they face their meat of the schedule. They lose a couple of games, and then they lose to teams they shouldn't. I mean, last year it was almost the same thing where they lost to Oregon, and then I think it was 2 weeks later losing at Arizona by like 5 touchdowns. So. I think they get back into it this week. Like you said, the rest of the schedule is not favorable. Cal, like I said, looks like a team that could very well put up a donut this year in Pac-12 play. I just don't see the Bears really contending. If I had a bigger margin in the picks to make up than I do, I might do it just to try to catch up on a game. But I just don't see a possibility where Cal wins another game this year, and definitely not over Washington, who should be far superior, even though they've looked bad the last couple weeks. I don't think it's going to be that one-sided, though, just because I'm concerned about Keith Price, his health. Sankey didn't do a whole lot last week. I think Siler Miles might get some snaps this week. I'm going to take the Huskies 38-21.
All right. Now let's move on to, I want to save Stanford, Oregon State for last, so we're going to tackle the USC game, taking on Utah. Both teams 4-3, both teams battling injuries to key players. Utah, Travis Wilson, his finger a little banged up after last week's Arizona game. Sounds like he's going to play. He said he's going to suck it up and play, I believe was his direct quote. USC, on the other hand, again, lost Marquise Lee last week. He's trying to play on Saturday, but no confirmation of whether or not he will, which obviously takes away a big part of that offense. The nice thing for USC is that their running game performed pretty well last week. Silas Red hitting, I think, 119 yards or something like that against Notre Dame in the loss and had a touchdown. And, you wonder what's going to happen in this game in terms of just who's going to be available. And if the Wilson who showed up against Stanford and maybe even against Oregon State, who had some flashes of brilliance there, if that guy shows up, Utah, I think, has a great shot at upsetting USC at home here, especially if they don't have Marquise Lee and really have to just rely on that run game because that makes them one-dimensional. And it's not as if USC hasn't struggled enough this season. The only thing that probably helps them is them being at home. And it's really a toss-up game for me. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take USC at home. I'll say it's not going to be too high scoring of a game. I'll say they take it 21-17.
I basically decided when I saw that game and that you were going first that I was just going to pick the opposite of what you picked.
That's fair. Yeah, it's really a toss-up game.
I'm trying to save face here with my picks and try to pass you, so I will take the Utes to go in to make their second upset special in the last 3 weeks on the road. I'm going to go ahead and take them to win 24-13 like you. I think it's going to be fairly low scoring. If Wilson, I'd feel a lot better if Wilson was 100% healthy here. I'm not sure the Utes offense without a healthy Wilson is going to be very good, but like I said, I think I'm inclined to pick the Utes here. All right, let's move on.
Arizona, Colorado in a I guess Colorado would be more of a trash fire, but Arizona has not looked super great this season. And, they're going down to Boulder. Obviously, Colorado coming off of a big win last week against Charleston Southern. You can just hear the sarcasm. But, again, I think Arizona, you look at what Arizona can do offensively, another one-dimensional team. They're, I think, last in pass offense in the Pac-12. They don't make very many mistakes back there, but they just don't rely on it. A lot of it goes to Kadeem Carey, their running back, who's right now behind Bishop Sankey for the lead in the Pac-12 by about, I think, 120 yards. If he has a big night, he could top the 1,000-yard mark. I think he's at 805 right now. I think he's 195 yards away from hitting that 1,000-yard mark, and a big night against Colorado could see him top 1,000. You look at Colorado defensively, they're horrible. They're towards the bottom of the pack in both pass defense and rushing defense. Arizona's not great, but they're better than Colorado, and they should go down there and win this game. I wouldn't be shocked if Colorado ended up pulling the upset, given that Arizona just seems to be very inconsistent. But for the sake of the pick, I will take Arizona. I'll say they hang 30 on Colorado. I'll take a 30-20 game.
I got off the Wildcat bandwagon a little early last week, and it kind of, if I would have got that game right, if I would have stuck with my Wildcats, we'd be tied up right now. So I'm inclined to go back on board with those guys, and they played well last week. They beat Utah, who was a team that looked like they might be headed towards perhaps a South Conference championship, or at least contending for that. Now Utah is a couple of games out of that, now 2 games behind UCLA, or I guess there's a game and a half. But I like Arizona here to win, obviously. I don't think it would be very surprising if they don't win this game, just because Colorado looks so inept, really on both sides of the ball. I'm going to go ahead and take the Wildcats to win 42-19.
All right. And now heading into the other marquee matchup, the matchup we kind of previewed a little bit earlier, or I guess teased. Oregon State sitting number 25 in the initial BCS standings, taking on number 8 Stanford. Stanford obviously coming off that big win against UCLA last week. Oregon State has pretty much walked through the easy part of their conference schedule and now face a similar schedule to what Oregon's going to face, a lot of tough teams on the back end there. And you're really going to get a chance to see, I think, what Oregon State's made of in this game, because I think Stanford, you've gotten a sense of what they can do against some tougher teams. UCLA being one of them last week. They didn't show up well against Utah, but they got the run established again last week. And really, that's my key for this game, is the fact that if Stanford can get that running game going again like they did, and make Oregon State look more that defensive line that was so shaky to start the year, if they can make that line look shaky again, Stanford should be able to go through and win this game, because they'll be able to control the clock, keep the ball out of Mannion's hands. And that, Mannion, you look at Stanford, not great, not terrible in terms of their pass defense right now, sitting, I believe, 6th, giving up 247 yards a game. Mannion's going to easily top that, I think, just because he's just having a stellar season, and him with Brandon Cooks. Storm Woods coming back gives them a little bit more of a dynamic role there and be able to get the run game going. But again, if Stanford controls the clock and controls the game with the run, like I think they should, they will win that game. I will take Stanford. I do think it's close. I think that you're looking at like a 28-24 game. Not saying super high scoring, just based off the fact that Oregon State likes to capitalize off of turnovers and terrible defenses, something that I don't think they're going to get a lot of opportunities this week to accomplish. And Stanford's going to be able to control that clock and really kind of grind that high-scoring offense down.
One thing that, I've talked to a lot of Beavers fans the last little bit here, and they bring up the fact that the Beavers haven't lost since Eastern Washington. They're 4-0 in the conference, that Mannion is leading the nation in passing, Cooks is also leading in receiving. And while I agree with all of that, you kind of look at who Oregon State has played so far, and it's arguably it's Colorado, Washington State, and Cal, who I think are probably the 3 worst teams in this conference. And then Utah, who you don't know what you're going to get exactly out of that team. And so I think you could argue that they've played 4 of the bottom 6 teams in the conference, and now their next, I guess their final 5 games are going to be against probably 5 of the top 6 teams in the conference. So they're really playing kind of like Oregon, a back heavy schedule here, and I think Stanford probably proves a little bit too strong for Oregon State just in terms of the talent factor. Now, Oregon State, just the way they play, because they throw the ball so much, if they do get up early, I could see them possibly being able to get away from the Cardinal, who don't play very well from behind. Of course, I made the same pick last week, taking UCLA for essentially the same reason. I think I've learned from that. Stanford's offense has not looked great. I just think Oregon State hasn't played this level of competition yet, and they might be in for kind of a rough run here with Stanford, USC, ASU, Washington, and Oregon to finish up their schedule here. If they're very fortunate, they don't play UCLA either. But I'm gonna, like you, take the Cardinal to win on the road there in what I think has to be a low-scoring game for them to win. So I'm going to go ahead and take them to win 24-16.
All right, so as we've shaped up the picks this week, it looks like the only thing that we differed on was USC and Utah. So we'll see next week if Eric can tie it up. And if Travis Wilson's healthy, I think you got a pretty good shot at that, man. Let's dive in really quick to recruiting, because this is going to be a big week this week for Oregon in terms of who's coming in. One of the people that is coming in that I got a chance to talk to earlier this week, actually yesterday, and you can see that story on eDuck right now. If you go to Tail Feather, actually it's on the front page, but if you go to Tail Feathers, we also have a ton of recruiting stuff up right now. Monte Nicholson, a very speedy but controlled defensive back / wide receiver out of Pennsylvania, making the 3,000-mile trip out here. It'll be his longest official visit that he's taken. He's also seen Michigan State, Pittsburgh, and Florida State. And one of the things he did say he was looking forward to seeing was DeAnthony Thomas. DeAnthony Thomas is his favorite player. Coincidentally, in high school right now, Nicholson, or at least last season, wore number 6. I think right now he's wearing number 20. But he gets a chance to see DeAnthony, gets a chance to come out, check out Oregon. He doesn't know a ton about it, so this is going to be one of those visits where, obviously a lot is made up about the facilities. We talk about that all the time, but this is going to be kind of an eye-opening experience, I think, for a guy like Nicholson who's coming all the way across the country to see that. And you look at his tape, and if you watch how he plays defensively, he's great at wrapping guys up. He could use a little bit more upper body strength in terms of taking guys down. If he stops and he doesn't get the guy down initially, he has a little bit of a struggle trying to drag the guy down to the ground unless he goes low with the legs. But his start and stop speed is incredible. He's got great agility. If a guy makes a miss, which from his tape I didn't see that really happening, but if he did make a miss, Nicholson easily catches up with the guy, can track a guy down from behind and cause some problems defensively. Now, Oregon wants him offensively. Matt Lubick sees him as a weapon, said that, according to Nicholson said that Josh Huff is a guy that they're looking at. He's that kind of a mold. And again, you look at the tape, you can see that he's a good downfield blocker in the same vein as Huff. He's got separation speed, so it makes him a deep threat, same as Huff. Decent size there, same as Huff, and he's just got a lot of these I guess intangibles and also very visible attributes that do mirror some of the things that Josh Huff can do. At the same time, you look at the way he runs, and he's got speed. I don't think he's got DeAnthony's speed, but he's pretty darn fast, and the way he's controlled with his cut moves, making the quick jab steps, he makes it all look effortless and picks up a lot of yards after the catch. A guy that you think if Oregon can pull him out of the East Coast would be a real asset to the team. And hopefully next week we will have an update on his trip. He said he would talk to us next week to let us know how that trip went. Talked to Brian Doan, who's a Scout East Coast national writer, who gave me his opinion, thinking that he wasn't going to venture far from the East Coast. But again, you got to wait till after the visit is taken. In other news, Greg Biggins broke this last night, kind of an unknown coming out of nowhere. Chris Brown, not the singer, but out of the LA area, plays for Loyola, a offensive tackle. According to Biggins, and I'm going to let Biggins kind of take this, I'm going to read from the story here. I don't know a ton about Chris Brown, admittedly. He's kind of come out of nowhere, and that even says so in the story. He says he's got a great frame, is very strong, moves well, and knows how to finish off a play. From the tape that I saw of him, and there's a highlight reel on his profile page on Scout if you want to go check that out. You don't see a lot of defensive ends coming around. He plays that left tackle spot. You're not seeing defensive ends break around him. Once he gets his hands on somebody, he's got the strength and the footwork to keep them in front of him. I think there's only one or two times where I saw a guy actually kind of slip around him, but even then he was able to deter him from getting to the running back. So he's going to be able to open up some holes. He's got great size, 6'6", I think 290 is his measurements right now. Obviously, getting into college, he might get a little bigger, but even then, he's got a great size right now. He's got visits set up to Texas A&M on November 9th. He will be visiting Oregon for the Utah game on the 16th. We'll be going down to UCLA the following week and finishing up with USC. I don't know what his and also Washington could be a visit for him going forward. I don't know what his favorites are. He doesn't say so in the story, but I got to imagine it's going to be tough to try and drag a kid out of LA away from USC and UCLA. That's going to be, especially given how UCLA has kind of revamped their program and is putting a little bit more of a focus on that offensive line. So I think those are a couple of teams Oregon will be battling to get Brown. Brown's got a decent offer list if you want to go check that out as well, but a kid to keep an eye on going forward in the future. So I think that's going to do it for me in terms of recruiting. Eric, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Well, you want to, I guess, only 3 visitors this week, right? The third being Juju Smith and Royce Freeman. Probably good to mention.
Right, yes. Royce Freeman will be coming out as well as Juju Smith. I've been trying to get in contact with Smith to no avail. Talked to Freeman about a week ago just to confirm everything that he was coming out. He will be here. So you'd hope that he's going to be working the angle a little bit for Oregon in terms of trying to get these kids. Obviously, Smith, a 5-star, the number 1 ranked safety in the country right now. And then Nicholson, though listed as the 15th best safety in the country, again, Oregon wants him at wide receiver. And at 6'3", 200 pounds, and with that speed, it'd be hard not to try and go after him hard if you're an Oregon coach. So that's what we got right now. Also, stay tuned because I'm sure there will be more added throughout the week as we get more information coming in.
The other thing before we finish up is just, I guess, to note that Oregon basketball season is nearly upon us. They have their first exhibition game this Sunday against Luke Jackson, coach NCU. So that could be kind of a fun event to come out and watch. I know they also have a couple of former Oregon players in Colton Baker and Austin Kemper, who were with the team last year before transferring, as well as former South Eugene star Spencer Coleman, who started last year for Montana, which was a team that made the NCAA tournament but had to leave because of some off-the-court issues. But that's going to be a fun game to check out. Obviously, going to be fun to see all the new players in uniform and kind of see what this team might look like down the road. Get a first. I mean, with so many new guys coming in, a lot of new faces to kind of get used to and kind of see what this team looks like, and also get a better idea of how Dana obviously won't have a rotation down, but kind of get a feel for how he thinks these guys kind of fit together. So that game we played this Sunday at Matthew Knight Arena. If you'd like to come check it out, please do. It would probably be fun. I'll have a story up, and I'll also have something up, I think, on Thursday or Friday of this week, just kind of updating what's going on with the team, maybe some player interviews. So stay tuned for that and for basketball season coming up. So I think that's all I've got on this end, Robbie.
All right, well, then let's wrap this up. Be sure to keep spreading the word. Check us out on Twitter at Eric_Scopel. I simplified my Twitter handle just because I didn't want to make people spell my last name. So I'm now at Rob_eDuck. So follow us there. Spread the word about the podcast. Subscribe on iTunes. We're there now. Go ahead and do it so that you don't have to keep downloading these things and keep trying to find it. Get it all in. You got one-stop shopping there. For the 29th edition of the eDuck podcast, we will talk to you all on Saturday. I'm Robbie Boydston.
Scopel out.